Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live. If you don't know me, I am Tim Miller. I have experience from transitioning from being a clinician, a PT by trade, and moving into the world of academics. And so currently, I do a lot of faculty mentoring, coaching, even clinician mentoring, coaching for those who want to transition into um, the teaching realm and that type of thing, and then also for faculty members who just want to learn more about how to be a faculty member. So today the topic is the do's and don'ts of discussion boards, and specifically thinking of PT and OT, education. In terms, in terms of thinking of it, that way. So, definitely want to look at, why discussion boards can be valuable, the do's and don'ts, based on not just what Tim thinks, but current education and educational technology research, and then thinking through of how to design prompts or how to think through, discussion boards to help your students think and act like a clinician. Um, so before we get started, I do want to just share that, I do have the experience of, or maybe you have as a student and also perhaps as a faculty member thinking, oh, well, if I just put X in a discussion board, it's going to help, everybody learn better, or it's going to be this huge collaborative space for learning. And that's not always the case. There's nothing magical about a discussion board, just like there's nothing magical about sitting in a classroom, just like there's nothing magical about, pressing play on a recorded lecture. So it's really, what you do with them, the intentions behind it, and how to design it in a way to, facilitate learning. So, um, one way to think of discussion boards is they're not just a participation tool. When used well, they can help students think like clinicians, and you can use it to analyze patient cases, apply evidence, even communicate like future professionals, or even just tie concepts together that you're going over in your course. Um, it's important to think about it. One way that I like to, consider it is in terms of the community of inquiry framework, which is really a foundational model of online learning research, that can be helpful to as you think through of how these discussion boards can work. Because typically the discussion boards are going to be, some asynchronous, through your learning management system, some asynchronous, participation event, and in that way. So, effective online discussions balances the three types of presence in that community of inquiry. So the cognitive presence of the mental effort, the students use to reason through the, whatever the prompt may be. The social presence, so connecting, students with peers and yourself. And then teaching presence, the structure and the guidance that we provide as, as the instructor. So when all three are visible, it can allow an environment for the students to engage more deeply and communicate with one another, and with the goal of retaining knowledge longer. Um, so, one way to think of discussion boards is really, bridging that didactic learning and clinical reasoning into a learning space that, you know, allows for that type of collaboration. So, let's move on to, what works, the research-based do's. So, what actually works. So, educational technology research and, PT and OT education studies consistently show, several best practices. First is design prompts for deep reasoning, not recall. So, thinking of, making the students analyze, evaluate, apply, not just describe. So for example, instead of just saying, what are the stages of tissue healing, ask, given a patient with delayed wound healing, what factors might be contributing? What evidence-based intervention would you prioritize? These types of things. So, really designing those prompts for that higher order thinking, and application of your content, not just, all right, well, it's a discussion board and I want you to answer this. Um, keeping groups small can be really, there's some evidence to support of, instead of a class-wide discussion board, so say your cohort is 40 students, it would be helpful to have discussion boards tiny, so 4 to 5 students. So smaller groups create, psychological safety and promote authentic discussion. And, the students are more likely to comment thoughtfully when they feel heard and it's smaller and it's not just, checking a box for something, to do for the coursework. Um, Structure the timing of the post. So saying, all right, well, I'd like an initial post by Wednesday, and if you would like a reply, or or have replies due by Sunday, or those types of things. Um, in that, think through, do you want to force replies? So I have my own personal thoughts on that, that I think a lot of times we think, well, if we force a reply, then people are going to engage. But sometimes with that forced engagement, it can feel like busy work. So be thoughtful with that and think of, well, encourage replying, but maybe not force it, or those types of things. So those are all things that obviously are outside the content or the depth of this discussion, but just thinking of it that way. And then showing your teaching presence. So model a good response, and showing what quality looks like. So not just, hey, good job, but what does that mean to have a good response, within that. And a good way to model that is having a rubric and saying, okay, I would like you to respond to at least one post, which is fine to do, but have a rubric and say, here's what the response needs to include. Good job isn't going to cut it. You should include, you know, this, and this. So, um, and then that way the student has some framework to work off of what it is that maybe it's, obviously the initial post or response or those types of things on what it is that you're looking for, for that discussion. So again, it may be that the rubric has, um, uh, you break down, okay, well, acknowledge that this was said, explain this in relation to your, your course content, or have a reflection, or those types of things. So, um, so that's really important. Thinking through inclusion and accessibility, so multiple ways to participate, and thinking of how might that change the intention behind the discussion board? So, perhaps it's an audio response, so they have to have a recorded response to a typed out, or an audio response to your initial prompt is what I'm, trying to say, or a video response, or maybe it is typed out. So, making sure that, you are having intention behind what it is or how they're answering questions, or those types of things. And then definitely be explicit about using generative AI. So clarify if, when tools can be used and how you would want them used, and expectations for disclosure, and how you want that to, look like. Um, so that way the discussion board isn't just a big copy and paste from whatever AI spit out for them. And then, helping think through, well, perhaps there's a personal reflection involved, or, those types of things. So really making sure you're thinking through that as well. So hopefully those, the do's, that's a brief overview of the do's. So now let's talk about those, what to avoid, or the common pitfalls. So what should we avoid? Definitely you don't want to grade by the number of posts. So, the post once, reply twice rule almost guarantees, superficial participation, or doing the bare minimum just to check it off. Instead, perhaps you grade it on evaluate what is said, or the depth and the quality of what is said. Try to avoid having large unmoderated threads. If there's are, 30 plus people in one thread, it could be easy to get lost in the shuffle. Definitely try to break it into smaller groups to encourage that peer-to-peer interaction. As an instructor, make sure that your presence is known, so don't disappear. You don't want to just vanish until grading or engagement is done. So you want to have that consistent presence within there. And definitely don't leave any timelines vague. So when deadlines are unclear, most will wait to the last minute. So structured timing is important. And then I would say most importantly is, being very clear on your prompts and don't use just generic prompts that they're responding to. So, not just like, hey, what did you think about this exercise? Instead of use very, very clear examples and um, like, okay, well, you just saw a patient that has this. What impairments explain that? What is your plan to assess them? Those types of things. So the more depth and clarity you have in your prompt, the more depth and clarity you're likely going to have in those discussion posts. And again, don't ignore AI ethics and all of that. So clarity on what's expected, technologically, professionally, making sure that there's clarity around the expectations for that participation as well. The other thing that I would say, as I want to transition to kind of bringing it all together, so those are the main pitfalls, but thinking through of, does this actually have to be a discussion board? Like, what is your goal of this being a discussion board? Oftentimes when I work with faculty, they initially think, oh, I'm going to have this discussion board and it's going to help just learning automatically because everybody's in there together. But as we dive a little bit deeper in the why or the reasoning behind the assignment, a lot of times it becomes clear that this really should just be a student to faculty interaction and doesn't need to be this public type of interaction, or the discussion board didn't really add any value to that learning. And in that case, you may just make it an assignment and not a discussion board. So even though we went through these do's and don'ts, like I said, talk about bringing it all together, really ask yourself, like, why am I making this a discussion board and what is going to be served by that, or what are the goals? So again, to kind of bring it all together, key takeaways is that what I just said. Designing purposeful prompts, that perhaps it's case based, or you want to have it, well, how is this going to elicit deep thought, reflection, tying together the concepts, those types of things. Prioritizing quality interactions over quantity. You as the instructor maintaining that teaching presence through guidance and feedback. And then, reinforcing professional communication ethics and, evidence-based thinking. And then again, applying rubrics and applying rubrics so the participation can be meaningful. So saying, well, for your reply, you need to have this, or for your initial post, it needs to have, these types of, items present. So, again, the goal is to facilitate learning, to help help them learn the content within your course. So designing discussion boards in the way that I just discussed, it can be more than just this online assignment or a checkbox, but they can be these collaborative spaces for growth and learning. So critical thinking, effective communication, all of those things. So again, brief overview of discussion boards. Hopefully that gives you at least some clear or actionable strategies for thinking about having engaging discussion boards, and again, those evidence-based practices, for your students. If you would like to learn more, please leave a comment or send me a direct message. I love talking about these items, and and also I would encourage you to reflect on your own experiences. Perhaps as have you ever had to participate in a discussion board and you're like, wow, that was really just a waste of time. I didn't read anyone's responses anyway. And what didn't work well for you there? Or have you been in part of really good discussion boards, and what did that look like? And learning from those experiences as well. So I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate everybody being here, and I hope to catch you next time. Thank you.